The cliffs along the southern coast of England were once the floor of a warm sea. About 176 million years ago, waves moved above what are now farms, villages, and winding country roads. There were no polar ice caps anywhere on Earth. Sea levels stood far higher than they do today. The continents were slowly pulling apart, and the oceans covered enormous stretches of land that have long since risen into the open air. It was a world that looks familiar only from a distance. When most people imagine the age of dinosaurs, they picture forests, giant sauropods, and predators walking across the land. But while dinosaurs dominated the continents, something altogether different was happening beneath the surface of the sea. Animals that had once walked on land returned to the water and changed so completely that they began to resemble fish. Others evolved eyes unlike anything that has ever existed before or since. Some hunted close to the sunlight. Others disappeared hundreds of meters into darkness before returning to the surface to breathe. Nothing living in today's oceans occupies quite the same place they once did. No great white sharks, no orcas, no sperm whales. None of the giants we think of today had appeared yet, and the oceans were no less dangerous without them. How did so many unrelated animals end up looking so similar? What was waiting in the darkness that made enormous eyes worth the cost? And why did an entire world of marine predators disappear so completely that the modern ocean still feels quieter because of it? In tonight's journey, we're leaving the dinosaur forests behind and following the creatures that ruled the seas instead, exploring the remarkable world that existed beneath the waves while dinosaurs walked the land above. If you're tucked in right now, phone dimmed, trying to let your brain slow down, this one was made for you. Give it a like, subscribe if you haven't, it's free, and it helps the channel more than you can imagine. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Let's descend beneath the warm waters of Jurassic Europe, where an entirely different kingdom was already waiting. The shape of the world itself was still unfinished. Continents that now seem permanent rested in positions they would never occupy again, joined together in arrangements that belonged to a passing chapter of planetary history. Across that immense span, the Jurassic period endured from roughly 201 million years ago until 145 million years ago, lasting 56 million years. By comparison, the time since the disappearance of the non-avian dinosaurs occupies only a fraction of that extraordinary interval, a brief chapter beside an age that unfolded with almost unimaginable patience. Beneath the forests where dinosaurs wandered, the foundations of the planet were already shifting. The immense supercontinent known as Pangaea had begun to separate along deep fractures within the crust. Those widening breaks marked the earliest outlines of oceans and coastlines that would eventually become familiar, although nothing yet resembled the modern world. Land drifted apart so gradually that no living creature could have noticed the movement, yet over millions of years, entire landscapes changed their place upon the globe. The poles held no towering sheets of ice. Water that today rests frozen across the far north and far south remained part of the open sea, spreading across low-lying continents. As a result, sea levels stood between 100 meters, which is about 328 feet, and 200 meters, that is nearly 656 feet, higher than those of the present day. Vast regions that are now fields, mountains, and cities rested beneath shallow marine water, creating broad continental seas filled with sunlight from shore to distant horizon. The atmosphere carried between 4 and 8 times more carbon dioxide than existed before widespread human industry. That abundance altered the chemistry of both air and sea, creating conditions with no complete modern equivalent. Average global temperatures remained approximately 4 degrees Celsius, or 39 degrees Fahrenheit, to 7 degrees Celsius, or 45 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than those of the present. Even the highest latitudes escaped permanent freezing. Warm currents reached far toward the poles, while the equatorial waters retained an almost constant embrace of heat from season to season. Stretching across the middle of the planet lay the Tethys Sea, an immense tropical waterway separating the northern and southern landmasses. Positioned beneath the strongest sunlight throughout the year, it gathered warmth on a planetary scale and redistributed it across the surrounding oceans. Its circulation influenced climates far beyond its own shores, guiding nutrients, heat, and marine life through pathways that no existing ocean can reproduce. The geography itself became an engine, sustaining a marine environment unlike any that followed. Meanwhile, the first beginnings of the future Atlantic Ocean emerged, where the separating continents allowed new crust to rise from below. These youthful ocean basins remained shallow and expansive, bordered by fresh coastlines that invited life into newly formed habitats. Every widening channel created additional room for reefs, lagoons, estuaries, and inland seas. Evolution encountered opportunity again and again, filling each opening with communities adapted to waters that had not existed before. Warmth extended through much of the water column rather than remaining confined near the surface. Nutrients circulated through expansive shallow seas, supporting immense populations of plankton, invertebrates, and countless smaller organisms. Their abundance nourished larger animals in numbers difficult to imagine today. Food chains lengthened across multiple layers of the sea, each level supported by remarkable biological productivity that endured over millions of years rather than brief intervals. Nothing within this world existed in isolation. The drifting continents, elevated carbon dioxide, rising seas, enduring warmth, and the vast reach of the Tethys Sea combined into a single planetary arrangement. Together they formed an ocean capable of sustaining lineages, interactions, and ecological complexity that belonged only to that distant age. When those conditions gradually passed away, they carried their living world with them, leaving behind only stone, fossils, and the enduring record of an ocean that would never assemble itself in quite the same way again. Life in that ancient sea was arranged less like a single food chain and more like a towering structure, each level occupied by hunters shaped for a different part of the water. The modern ocean still contains remarkable predators, yet its upper ranks are comparatively narrow. Great white sharks patrol the brighter layers, sperm whales descend into the deepest hunting grounds, orcas move between coastlines and open water with remarkable flexibility. Each lineage commands an impressive place, but only a handful of lineages share those highest positions. The Jurassic Sea followed another design altogether. Several unrelated groups of enormous air-breathing reptiles occupied the same ocean at the same time, each pursuing prey in a different region of the water column. Rather than replacing one another, they divided the sea into overlapping territories, refining different bodies, different senses, and different methods, until almost every depth belonged to something capable of hunting within it. Across the upper waters moved broad-bodied reptiles, driven by 4 powerful flippers instead of tails alone. Their skulls carried immense muscles that concentrated nearly all their strength into a single closing motion of the jaws. Every feature, from the shortened neck to the reinforced head, served the purpose of overpowering large, struggling prey before escape became possible. Their domain extended across the sunlit layers, where speed and force met in sudden encounters. Far below, another lineage traveled through darker water with an entirely different solution. Their bodies narrowed into smooth, efficient forms that reduced resistance with every stroke. Vision became their defining advantage. Eyes of astonishing size gathered the smallest traces of available light, allowing them to pursue prey in places where brighter surface hunters could accomplish very little. They remained dependent upon air from above, yet their daily lives unfolded far beneath the reach of ordinary daylight. Between those extremes moved reptiles, whose ancestry traced back to crocodilian relatives that had abandoned nearly every familiar feature of their former existence. Their bodies no longer resembled the heavy armored forms associated with riverbanks and marshes. They occupied coastal passages and middle depths with streamlined shapes that transformed ancient terrestrial hunters into accomplished marine pursuit predators. Not every giant in these waters hunted flesh. Enormous filter feeders drifted through productive seas with mouths opened wide, gathering countless microscopic organisms suspended in the current. Some reached lengths comparable to modern city buses, surviving not through violence, but through abundance itself. Their immense size reflected the extraordinary richness of the ecosystem supporting them, proving that even the largest bodies could be sustained without chasing large prey. Below every hunter spread an immense living foundation. Ammonites and belemnites filled the sea in extraordinary numbers, reproducing across habitats and depths until they became the nourishment supporting nearly every higher predator. Countless smaller fishes and marine animals depended upon them as well, weaving together a network so extensive that energy flowed upward through layer after layer without interruption. Every successful hunter ultimately relied upon this immense reservoir of life. Within such an arrangement, safety became remarkably scarce. A swift swimmer escaping danger near the surface might descend only to encounter another specialist waiting below. An animal avoiding attack from beneath could find another predator approaching across open water. Pressure arrived from several directions at once. Each hunter adapted to exploit opportunities created by the movements of the others. Competition existed alongside coexistence, producing an ecological balance built upon extraordinary diversity rather than a single dominant lineage. Even familiar comparisons begin to lose their usefulness. Enlarging today's great white sharks, sperm whales, and orcas to twice their present size would still leave much of this ancient hierarchy unexplained, because several additional groups of giant predators occupied equally important positions while sharing no close living equivalent. Their bodies represented evolutionary experiments that flourished together within one remarkable ocean, each answering a different challenge posed by the same world. Among them, one lineage carried adaptation farther into darkness than any of its companions. Descended from land-dwelling ancestors, transformed into masters of deep water, it united breath from the atmosphere with journeys into depths beyond the reach of every other great reptile of its age. Within that graceful contradiction rested one of the most extraordinary stories preserved in the history of ancient seas. Some evolutionary journeys leave traces that remain easy to recognize even after millions of years. Others become so complete that the starting point almost disappears. The ichthyosaurs belonged to the latter path. They were not fish, nor were they early sharks. Every breath they took revealed their true ancestry, for they remained reptiles throughout their long history, descendants of animals whose distant forebears had once crossed solid ground beneath an open sky. Their return to the sea began during the early Triassic, around 250 million years ago. A lineage of land-dwelling reptiles entered coastal waters and, generation after generation, drifted farther from the shore. The transformation unfolded across immense spans of time. Limbs adapted for walking, gradually surrendered their former purpose. Bodies changed in proportion, muscles shifted, and skeletons responded to the demands of constant movement through water until almost every outward feature reflected a fully marine existence. The finished result appeared remarkably familiar, despite arising from an entirely different beginning. The body narrowed into a smooth, streamlined form. A dorsal fin stabilized movement through open water. The tail broadened into a crescent-shaped fin that generated powerful forward thrust. Arms and legs flattened into flippers that guided movement with remarkable precision. Yet beneath those flippers remained the unmistakable pattern of the ancient hand. 5 digits compressed, shortened, fused, and reshaped rather than erased. Evolution had revised the design instead of abandoning it. Seen from a distance, an ichthyosaur could easily be mistaken for a modern dolphin. The resemblance extended far beyond appearance. Both possessed streamlined bodies, balanced fins, and tails adapted for sustained swimming across vast distances. Yet their shared form emerged independently. Mammals and reptiles followed separate evolutionary histories, arriving at nearly identical solutions because the ocean consistently rewarded the same efficient design. This remarkable process, known as convergent evolution, demonstrates that unrelated lineages can discover the same answer when confronted by the same physical world. The dolphin shape emerged twice, separated by roughly 150 million years, and built from entirely different ancestral foundations. By the Jurassic, ichthyosaurs had already lived in the sea for nearly 100 million years. Their connection with land had become irreversible. Their hips no longer supported the weight required for movement across a shoreline, and their bodies depended completely upon buoyancy provided by water. Every stage of life unfolded beneath the surface, from the first moments of birth until the final descent after death. That complete commitment demanded another extraordinary adaptation. Unlike turtles, which still crawl ashore to lay eggs, ichthyosaurs could never return to land for reproduction. Their young developed within the mother's body and entered the world already surrounded by seawater. Birth itself reflected careful evolutionary refinement. Fossil evidence shows that newborns emerged tail first, reducing the chance that the head would remain underwater for too long before reaching the surface to breathe. Modern dolphins follow precisely the same pattern, despite belonging to an entirely different branch of the tree of life. Once again, the sea had guided unrelated animals toward an identical solution. Several kinds of ichthyosaurs shared these waters simultaneously. Temnodontosaurus reached lengths of about 9 meters, which is about 30 feet, growing into one of the largest members of its group. Stenopterygius remained much smaller, yet appeared in far greater numbers, becoming one of the most frequently discovered marine reptiles within Jurassic fossil deposits. Together, they occupied different roles without competing directly for every source of food, demonstrating how varied this lineage had become after millions of years, refining its place in the ocean. Among them lived another form whose remarkable anatomy extended far beyond graceful swimming or successful reproduction. Its body carried an adaptation unlike anything known among living vertebrates, one that revealed a relationship with darkness far below the brighter waters above. In its enormous eyes rested evidence that the ancient sea still contained depths few other air-breathing hunters could regularly enter, and that a reptile born from terrestrial ancestors had become one of their most accomplished travelers. Among the many forms shaped by the Jurassic Sea, one carried its greatest marvel within its own skull. Ophthalmosaurus takes its name from the Greek words meaning eye lizard. The name sounds almost mythical, yet it describes a measurable anatomical reality rather than an imaginative flourish. Long before its skeleton revealed the rest of the animal, its eyes announced that this reptile had followed a path unlike any other marine hunter of its age. Each eyeball measured approximately 26 centimeters in diameter, which is about 10 inches. Spread across the face, they approached the size of a dinner plate, making them the largest eyes known in the entire history of vertebrate life. Even today, no fish, reptile, bird, or mammal possesses eyes that surpass them. For comparison, the sperm whale, the largest toothed predator alive, and an accomplished diver into profound darkness, carries eyes measuring roughly 10 centimeters, which is about 4 inches, across. Ophthalmosaurus exceeded that by nearly threefold, investing an extraordinary amount of energy into organs that demanded constant nourishment and careful protection. Evolution rarely preserves such costly structures without an equally valuable reward. Growing eyes of this scale required resources that could otherwise have supported muscle, bone, or reproduction. Their persistence across countless generations speaks of relentless natural selection acting in one particular direction. Somewhere beyond the brighter layers of the sea, vision offered advantages so significant that no smaller eye could accomplish the same task. Hidden within each eye rested an elegant framework of small interlocking bones known as scleral ossicles. Unlike the flexible eye tissues familiar in most living mammals, these delicate rings reinforced the globe from within. As the surrounding water pressed inward with increasing force, the bones helped preserve the eye's shape, preventing deformation that would blur vision or damage delicate internal structures. They formed a natural support system, allowing remarkable eyesight to function beneath immense pressure. The arrangement, thickness, and geometry of those bones can be examined through biomechanical analysis, revealing how much external force they could withstand before failure. Paleontologists and engineers studying these fossilized structures reached a remarkable conclusion. Ophthalmosaurus regularly descended to depths of about 600 meters, which is about 1,969 feet. Such estimates arise not from imagination, but from the physical limits preserved inside the animal's own anatomy. At 600 meters, which is about 1,969 feet, the sea becomes a profoundly different environment. Sunlight fades long before reaching those depths. The water grows far colder than the warmer surface above, while pressure climbs to roughly 60 atmospheres, compressing every air-filled space with relentless force. Familiar outlines disappear, leaving only the faintest traces of illumination created by living organisms themselves. Those immense eyes transformed that darkness into a landscape rich with subtle detail. Every available particle of light could be gathered across their broad surfaces. Brief flashes produced by bioluminescent animals, faint glowing trails, and delicate glimmers reflecting from moving bodies became visible where smaller eyes would perceive almost nothing. Ophthalmosaurus occupied a realm inaccessible to most competing predators, finding opportunity where others encountered only darkness. Its existence carried an extraordinary contradiction. Like every other marine reptile, it remained dependent upon the atmosphere. It still had to return to the surface for each breath before descending once more into the depths below. A single hunting journey covered more than 1 kilometer, that is nearly 0.62 miles, downward and then upward again, completed without drawing another breath. Such repeated voyages demanded remarkable endurance alongside exceptional sensory adaptation. No feature of this animal existed in isolation. Every enlarged eye, every reinforcing bone, Every carefully shaped contour reflected an ancient partnership between anatomy and environment. The sea had presented a challenge hidden far beneath its brighter waters, and Ophthalmosaurus answered it with one of the most extraordinary visual systems evolution has ever produced, leaving behind a fossil record detailed enough to preserve not only the creature itself, but the depth of the world in which it truly belonged. Not every fossil tells its story through towering skeletons or perfectly preserved skulls. Sometimes the smallest and least celebrated traces carry the most intimate record of a vanished life. Among the most remarkable of these are coprolites, fossilized feces preserved within ancient sediment. They reveal not what an animal might have eaten according to its teeth or jaws, but what actually passed through its digestive system during its final hours. Jurassic deposits from several locations have yielded coprolites attributed to ichthyosaurs, and repeated examination has uncovered the same unexpected pattern. Embedded throughout these ancient remains are extraordinary numbers of tiny curved hooks that once armed the grasping limbs of belemnites. Their abundance is impossible to dismiss as an occasional meal. Thousands of hooks may occur within a single specimen, demonstrating sustained feeding over long periods rather than isolated moments of opportunity. The same evidence appears elsewhere within the fossil record. Ichthyosaur skeletons recovered from the Holzmaden Formation of southern Germany frequently preserve the region once occupied by the digestive tract. Within that space, paleontologists have discovered dense concentrations of identical belemnite hooks, preserved exactly where the final meals remained at the moment of death. Across roughly 180 million years, the contents of an ancient stomach have survived long enough to be examined in extraordinary detail. The prey responsible for these discoveries deserves equal attention. Belemnites belong to the same broad group as modern squid and octopuses, although they represented a distinct branch with their own unique anatomy. Their bodies moved through the water by powerful jet propulsion, while 10 flexible arms surrounded the mouth. Each arm carried rows of small hardened hooks capable of gripping struggling prey with remarkable efficiency. Hidden within the body rested a solid internal structure composed of mineralized material. After death, this durable guard often survived burial and eventually fossilized into the smooth, bullet-shaped objects scattered through Jurassic marine rocks around the world. Countless people have collected these curious fossils without realizing they once formed part of an active marine predator. The abundance of belemnites reached levels that the modern ocean no longer approaches. Vast schools occupied layers where dissolved oxygen became noticeably reduced, creating a stable concentration of prey between roughly 300 meters, which is about 984 feet, and 600 meters, which is about 1,969 feet. These waters formed a dependable feeding ground for hunters, capable of reaching them repeatedly. Viewed alongside the remarkable eyes and reinforced eye bones described earlier, the evidence begins to merge into a single ecological portrait. Ophthalmosaurus did not descend through the water column in search of uncertain opportunity. It traveled toward a predictable source of nourishment that remained largely beyond the reach of competing predators closer to the surface. Its extraordinary vision detected prey within dim conditions, while the supporting structures inside the eyes allowed those organs to continue functioning beneath immense pressure. Anatomy and behavior matched one another with remarkable precision. One especially valuable specimen from Germany preserves an ichthyosaur that appears to have expelled part of its digestive contents during the moments surrounding its death. The preserved hooks can be matched with particular kinds of belemnites already known from the same deposits. Those species occupied depth ranges consistent with the biomechanical estimates calculated from the reinforced eyes. Independent lines of evidence converge upon the same conclusion without relying upon speculation. What remains inside these fossils is more than evidence of feeding. It preserves the closing chapter of an individual animal's ordinary day. The prey it pursued, the habitat where the encounter occurred, and the final meal carried within its body all survived the passing of immense geological ages. Stone retained details that living memory never could, allowing the rhythms of an ancient hunt to emerge once again through traces so modest that they might easily have been overlooked. Power alone rarely explains the success of a predator. It must also be directed, supported, and refined until every part of the body serves the same purpose. Among the greatest marine hunters of the Jurassic, that principle reached an extraordinary expression in the pliosaurs, reptiles whose entire anatomy revolved around overpowering prey that neither speed nor endurance alone could subdue. They occupied the brighter layers of the sea above many of the deep-diving ichthyosaurs, patrolling the surface and middle waters where large animals gathered. There they encountered prey too massive to disappear into narrow crevices or escape through prolonged pursuit. Success depended upon explosive acceleration, overwhelming force, and absolute control during the struggle that followed. Although their names are similar, pliosaurs and plesiosaurs followed very different evolutionary paths. Plesiosaurs carried remarkably long necks, ending in comparatively small heads. Their bodies favored surprise, allowing the neck to extend toward unsuspecting prey while the heavier body remained farther behind. Pliosaurs abandoned that arrangement entirely. Their necks became compact and immensely powerful, supporting skulls that expanded into some of the largest carried by any marine reptile. Shortening the neck was not a compromise. It strengthened the entire structure, allowing tremendous forces generated by the jaws to pass through the skeleton without placing excessive stress upon elongated vertebrae. The rest of the body reflected the same philosophy. 4 broad paddle-shaped flippers worked together rather than relying primarily upon the tail. Instead of producing thrust through side-to-side undulations like many fishes, each flipper contributed powerful strokes that propelled the animal through the water with remarkable control. A deep barrel-shaped torso housed the muscles needed to drive those movements, while the relatively short tail acted mainly as a stabilizing surface rather than the primary engine of motion. This arrangement provided a style of swimming unlike that of most modern marine predators. A pliosaur could surge upward from below, pivot sharply during pursuit, and redirect its body through 3-dimensional space with surprising agility despite its immense size. The coordinated action of all 4 flippers resembled the movement of great birds flying through the atmosphere, except that every stroke pushed against dense seawater rather than air. The surrounding medium differed, but the underlying mechanical principle remained strikingly similar. Its jaws completed the design. The teeth were thick, conical, and closely interlocked when the mouth closed. Instead of slicing flesh into neat sections, they specialized in gripping prey with tremendous security. Once those teeth penetrated muscle or bone, escape became exceedingly difficult. Every movement made by the struggling victim only pressed it more firmly against the surrounding rows of teeth, transforming the mouth into a living restraint capable of enduring violent resistance. The skull itself reveals another intriguing feature. In addition to the pair of nasal openings expected in reptiles, paleontologists have identified another pair positioned farther back. Their exact function remains uncertain, yet their placement has encouraged the idea that pliosaurs possessed an especially refined ability to detect dissolved chemical traces drifting through seawater. Modern sharks can follow faint scent gradients across astonishing distances, sometimes spanning many kilometers, which is about many miles. Pliosaurs may have relied upon a comparable sensory system while searching broad stretches of open sea. Like every great marine reptile described so far, they still depended upon the atmosphere. Each hunt unfolded between regular returns to the surface for another breath. That necessity never diminished their authority over the upper waters. Within that realm, they represented perhaps the greatest concentration of force the Jurassic Sea had yet produced. The fossil record preserves the consequences with remarkable honesty. Bones of ichthyosaurs and even other plesiosaurs carry deep bite marks matching pliosaur teeth in size and spacing. These scars reveal an ecosystem in which the largest hunters did not merely compete for smaller animals. They also hunted one another, each encounter adding another layer to a world where even the highest ranks of the food web remained part of another predator's reach. Far to the north, where frozen ground now guards layers of ancient stone, the past sometimes emerges only when the landscape begins to change. Across the islands of Svalbard in the Arctic Ocean, thick permafrost long concealed marine sediments that had rested undisturbed since the Jurassic. As warming conditions gradually exposed portions of those rocks, paleontologists gained access to a chapter of natural history that had remained hidden for well over 100 million years. During the years 2006 and 2007, excavations in those newly exposed deposits uncovered scattered bones of extraordinary size. Recovering them demanded years of careful work, for the remains were deeply embedded within hard rock and spread across multiple locations. Piece by piece, the skeleton revealed an animal so immense that it immediately joined the ranks of the greatest marine predators ever discovered. The species received the scientific name Pliosaurus funke, while the research team informally referred to it as Predator X. The nickname spread rapidly because it captured the sense of scale suggested by the fossils themselves. Even before every bone had been studied, the proportions hinted that this reptile represented one of the most formidable hunters the ancient ocean had ever produced. Its skull alone approached 2 meters in length, which is about 6 feet 7 inches. Each of its 4 flippers extended farther than the height of a fully grown adult person. The complete body is estimated to have measured between 10 kilometers, which is about 6.2 miles, and 13 kilometers, which is about 8 miles. That statement would obviously be impossible for a living animal, so the fossil evidence instead supports a body length between 10 meters, which is about 33 feet, and 13 meters, that is nearly 43 feet. Even at the lower estimate, it ranked among the largest pliosaurs known from the fossil record. Understanding its true strength required more than measuring bones. During the year 2013, researchers combined detailed computed tomography, scanning with biomechanical modeling to reconstruct the size and arrangement of the jaw muscles. By calculating the cross-sectional area available for muscle attachment and the leverage created by the skull, they estimated the maximum force those jaws could generate when fully closed. The result surpassed expectations. The bite force reached approximately 33,000 pounds per square inch. Comparisons with familiar predators place that figure into remarkable perspective. Tyrannosaurus rex, among the most thoroughly studied terrestrial hunters in paleontology, is estimated to have delivered roughly 8,000 pounds per square inch. The saltwater crocodile, the strongest living biting animal, reaches approximately 3,700 pounds per square inch. The great white shark produces roughly 4,000 pounds per square inch. Predator X exceeded each of them by a remarkable margin, standing at roughly 4 times the bite force of Tyrannosaurus rex, nearly 9 times that of the saltwater crocodile, and more than 8 times that of the great white shark. Within the marine world, such power transformed bone from protection into little more than resistance. Thick turtle shells, reinforced rib cages, and even the skulls of other marine reptiles could all be damaged by a single decisive bite. The jaws did not merely seize prey, they possessed sufficient force to overwhelm structural defenses that protected many other large animals of the Jurassic Sea. Equally significant is the fact that Svalbard yielded evidence belonging to more than one individual. Predator X was not an isolated giant preserved by extraordinary luck. It formed part of a functioning ecosystem, living alongside other members of its own species within the late Jurassic Ocean. Its immense size and overwhelming bite were characteristics of a successful lineage rather than an exceptional accident. Years of continued discovery have expanded knowledge of Jurassic marine reptiles, yet none has produced a confirmed ocean predator capable of exceeding the bite force reconstructed for Pliosaurus funki. Across changing coastlines, shifting continents, and countless fossil discoveries, that extraordinary record continues to endure, preserved within stone that once rested beneath an ancient sea. Some lineages carry their ancestry so visibly that even a distant glance reveals where they came from. Crocodilians are among them. Across rivers, wetlands, and estuaries of the modern world, their bodies still display rows of bony plates embedded beneath the skin, extending from the skull toward the tail. These structures, known as osteoderms, provide protection, strengthen the body, and have characterized crocodilian evolution for more than 200 million years. Yet within the Jurassic Sea, one remarkable branch of that family departed from nearly every expectation. The marine reptiles, known as thalattosuchians, gradually abandoned the defining features that had long identified their ancestors. The familiar armor disappeared. Those heavy osteoderms vanished entirely, replaced by smooth, flexible skin that allowed water to flow across the body with far less resistance. Protection yielded to efficiency, and the sea rewarded the exchange. The transformation extended through every major part of the skeleton. Legs that had once supported movement across riverbanks and floodplains shortened with each passing evolutionary stage. They continued shrinking until walking itself became impossible. The limbs broadened sideways into powerful flippers capable of producing thrust through open water, yet they could no longer lift the animal across solid ground. This was not merely a preference for marine life. It represented the permanent loss of any practical return to land. The tail changed just as dramatically. Near its end, the vertebral column curved downward, supporting soft tissue that expanded into a tall vertical fin. This arrangement, known as a hypocercal tail, generated propulsion in a manner strikingly similar to that of many sharks, despite arising within an entirely different group of reptiles. The resemblance is supported not only by skeletal anatomy, but also by exceptionally preserved soft tissue impressions. In certain fossils, the actual outline of the fin remains visible within the surrounding rock, preserving details that bone alone could never reveal. Taken together, these modifications produced an animal that scarcely resembled the crocodilian form from which it had descended. Smooth skin, reduced drag. Flippers generated efficient steering and propulsion. The shark-like tail supplied powerful forward movement across open water. Every alteration reflected countless generations responding to the physical demands of marine life until the ancient shoreline became little more than an ancestral memory recorded within the skeleton itself. This remarkable transformation illustrates another example of convergent evolution. Similar environmental challenges repeatedly guided unrelated lineages toward comparable solutions. Fish, sharks, ichthyosaurs, and these marine crocodilians each developed streamlined bodies suited to sustained swimming, even though their evolutionary histories diverged long before they entered the sea. Water imposed its own consistent rules, and evolution repeatedly discovered effective ways to satisfy them. The Thalattosaucians did not all occupy the same role. Different species specialized in different forms of hunting, expanding the already remarkable diversity of Jurassic marine predators. Among the most agile was Metriohencus, reaching approximately 3 meters, that is nearly 10 feet, in length. Its comparatively modest size allowed rapid pursuit of fishes and other swift prey through coastal waters and open channels. Larger relatives expanded into broader ecological roles, capturing increasingly substantial animals as their bodies and jaws grew more formidable. Even so, these marine crocodilians did not dominate the highest levels of the food web. Greater predators still patrolled the upper ranks of the Jurassic Ocean, while Thalattosaucians occupied the productive middle tiers between smaller hunters and enormous apex reptiles. Their importance rested not in overwhelming size, but in the additional complexity they contributed to an ecosystem already crowded with specialized carnivores. Every successful adaptation filled another ecological position, leaving remarkably little of the sea unclaimed. Their story demonstrates how thoroughly evolution can reshape even the most familiar body plan. An armored reptile that once depended upon firm ground became a streamlined marine hunter, carrying scarcely any visible reminder of its terrestrial past. The transformation reached so far that later discoveries would confuse even experienced paleontologists, revealing just how completely one branch of the crocodilian family had become something entirely unexpected. Evolution occasionally travels so far from its starting point that even experienced scientists struggle to recognize where the journey began. Among the marine crocodilians, no species illustrates that transformation more completely than Dakosaurus maximus. It emerged from the same broad lineage as other Thalattosaucians, yet its anatomy departed so dramatically from the familiar crocodilian design that its identity became difficult to recognize even in the fossil record. The most striking departure appeared in the skull. Rather than displaying the broad, elongated profile associated with living crocodilians, the head became compressed from side to side into a narrow, blade-like form, unlike that of any known crocodilian. Living or extinct, every contour suggested an animal pursuing a different style of hunting from the ambush strategy practiced by its distant relatives. The familiar outline had been reshaped until almost every visible feature pointed toward a life spent pursuing prey through open water. When one of the earliest significant specimens emerged from Jurassic rocks in Patagonia within modern Argentina, paleontologists faced an unexpected puzzle. The skull differed so completely from established crocodilian anatomy that its first identification placed it within an entirely different group. Researchers initially believed they had uncovered the remains of a large predatory fish. Only after additional study did the true identity become clear. The remarkable fossil belonged not to a fish at all, but to a crocodilian whose evolutionary path had wandered farther from its origins than almost anyone had imagined possible. Its teeth reinforced that conclusion. Modern crocodiles rely primarily upon thick, conical teeth designed to seize prey securely before drowning or tearing it apart. Dakosaurus replaced those tools with broad, laterally flattened teeth carrying finely serrated edges. Instead of acting as gripping spikes, they functioned like cutting blades, capable of slicing through flesh during powerful bites delivered in open water. The skull, jaws, and teeth work together as components of an active pursuit predator rather than a patient hunter waiting beside a shoreline. The dramatic appearance earned the admiration of the scientists who examined one of the most complete specimens recovered from Argentina. Informally, they referred to it by the nickname Godzilla. Although unofficial, the comparison reflected the powerful impression created by its massive head and formidable dentition. The fossil conveyed an image of strength unlike that of any other known marine crocodilian, combining familiar ancestry with anatomy that seemed almost impossible for that ancestry to produce. In overall size, Dakosaurus remained more modest than the enormous pliosaurs dominating the upper levels of the Jurassic Sea. Adults measured approximately between 4 meters, which is about 13 feet, and 5 meters, that is nearly 16 feet, in length. Even so, body size alone never defined ecological importance. Within its own range of prey and competitors, Dakosaurus occupied the position of a highly capable predator whose specialized adaptations allowed it to thrive among other formidable marine hunters. Its success is reflected not merely in anatomy but also in geography. Fossils assigned to Dakosaurus have been recovered from Argentina, England, France, Germany, and Poland. Such a broad distribution demonstrates that this animal flourished across vast portions of the Jurassic Ocean rather than remaining confined to a single coastline or isolated basin. It belonged to an enduring and widespread marine ecosystem that stretched across continents connected by warm ancient seas. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Dakosaurus is not any single feature of its body, but the company it kept. It shared the ocean with the immense pliosaurs whose crushing jaws ruled the upper waters, with deep-diving Ophthalmosaurus descending toward darkness, with elegant long-necked plesiosaurs moving through other ecological layers, and with the enormous filter-feeding fish, Leedsichthys, drifting through productive currents. These extraordinary animals did not belong to separate ages. They occupied the same living sea, their lives overlapping within a marine world whose diversity continues to challenge every modern comparison. Long before museums displayed its bones beneath carefully arranged lights, the remains of one remarkable creature emerged piece by piece from heavy clay lifted by the hands of a patient English farmer. Alfred Leeds spent decades working the Oxford Clay Formation across central England during the closing years of the 19th century. He was not trained as a professional paleontologist. He simply recognized that the ancient seabed beneath those quarries preserved a world unlike any living sea, and he devoted years to recovering what time had concealed. Among the countless fossils collected from those layers were enormous fragments, unlike anything that could be easily understood. Individual bones appeared immense, yet they seemed disconnected from one another, belonging to an animal whose overall form resisted reconstruction. For more than a century, researchers struggled to determine exactly what those scattered remains represented. The eventual name reflected both the man who uncovered so much of the material and the mystery surrounding it. Leedsichthys problematicus honored Alfred Leeds, while the second name acknowledged the extraordinary difficulty of interpreting an animal preserved mostly as isolated fragments rather than complete skeletons. As additional discoveries accumulated from Jurassic rocks, a clearer picture gradually emerged. Leedsichthys was not a marine reptile sharing ancestry with the giant predators already encountered. Neither was it a shark. It belonged to the ray-finned fishes, the same broad lineage that today includes animals as familiar as tuna, salmon, and sea bass. That connection feels almost impossible when viewed beside its immense proportions, Yet evolutionary history often stretches familiar designs into astonishing scales. Estimating the size of such an incomplete animal proved challenging for generations. Early reconstructions, built from limited material and uncertain comparisons, suggested lengths approaching 27 meters, which is about 89 feet. As additional specimens allowed more careful study, those estimates became more restrained. The strongest current evidence indicates that the largest known individuals measured between 14 meters, that is nearly 46 feet, and 16 meters, which is about 52 feet. Even at those revised dimensions, Leedsichthys exceeded nearly every other known bony fish and rivaled the greatest fishes ever to inhabit the oceans. For comparison, the whale shark, the largest fish living today, generally reaches around 12 meters, which is about 39 feet. Leedsichthys may therefore have surpassed even that celebrated giant. Yet immense size did not make it a hunter of equally enormous prey. Its feeding strategy followed an entirely different path, one that depended not upon speed or crushing force, but upon abundance carried by warm ocean currents. Swimming steadily through productive Jurassic waters, Leedsichthys opened its vast mouth and allowed water to stream inward. Inside, specialized gill rakers strained tiny drifting organisms, delicate invertebrates, and countless juvenile animals from the passing current. Every mouthful contained innumerable small lives, gathered together by the remarkable productivity of that ancient sea. Like the modern whale shark and basking shark, it transformed tiny creatures into extraordinary body mass through constant feeding rather than violent pursuit. Its presence illustrates another dimension of the Jurassic Ocean, an ecosystem capable of supporting such an immense filter feeder required astonishing biological richness from its smallest inhabitants upward. Plankton flourished in immense quantities, sustaining swarms of drifting life, which in turn nourished animals of increasing size until the food web reached the formidable predators already moving through the upper and deeper waters. Even the largest, peaceful giant depended upon the smallest forms of life suspended within the sea. The story preserved in its bones, however, does not end with gentle feeding. Multiple specimens of Leedsichthys bear bite marks matching the distinctive teeth of large pliosaurs. The patterns carved into fossilized bone reveal encounters between the greatest filter-feeding fish of its age and predators equipped with overwhelming jaw strength. It becomes possible to picture an immense animal gliding through warm currents, gathering countless drifting organisms with effortless persistence, while beneath that broad body another giant rose through the water, carrying enough force in a single bite to challenge even the largest fish the Jurassic world could produce. Across the ancient sea floor, countless shells settled one after another until entire layers of stone became woven from their remains. Long before their names were known, these creatures had already written themselves into the fabric of the planet. Even today, lifting a rock from a Jurassic marine formation almost anywhere on Earth carries a genuine possibility of revealing one of them. Their fossils appear with astonishing frequency, scattered across every continent in numbers that suggest populations beyond anything the modern ocean has ever supported. These animals were ammonites, members of the cephalopod lineage that also includes the living nautilus, squid, and octopus. Unlike their soft-bodied relatives, ammonites carried an elegant external shell that grew throughout their lives. Each new stage of growth added another chamber to the spiral, while older chambers became sealed away. Those empty compartments filled with carefully regulated gases, allowing the animal to maintain nearly neutral buoyancy as it drifted or swam through the water column. The shell was more than protection. It functioned as a remarkably precise biological instrument, balancing weight and lift with extraordinary efficiency. The design remained consistent while diversity flourished around it. Rather than representing a single, successful species, ammonites expanded into hundreds of distinct forms, occupying different ecological roles. Some favored shallower waters illuminated by sunlight. Others lived farther below, where changing pressure and diminishing light shaped different ways of life. Their shells varied in ornamentation, thickness, and overall form, reflecting countless evolutionary experiments built upon the same elegant foundation. Across millions of years, they became one of the defining inhabitants of the Jurassic Ocean. Their sizes also spanned an immense range. The smallest species could rest comfortably upon the palm of a hand, scarcely larger than a coin. At the opposite extreme stood titanites, whose shells reached approximately 53 centimeters in diameter, that is nearly 21 inches across. Encountering such a shell in the rock today creates an unusual impression. What resembles an intricate stone ornament was once the floating home of a living cephalopod, carried through warm seas beneath a sky unlike the one above the modern world. Such abundance shaped everything surrounding it. The immense variety of ammonites supported food webs of remarkable complexity. Some predators captured them directly, crushing or piercing their shells before reaching the soft animal within. Others relied upon prey that had themselves grown fat upon juvenile ammonites. Energy flowed upward through countless connections until it reached the largest hunters already encountered across these waters. From deep-diving reptiles with enormous eyes to crushing-jawed giants patrolling the upper layers, each depended either directly or indirectly upon the extraordinary success of the ammonite radiation. Remove that foundation, and the towering ecological pyramid above it could never have existed. The shell itself possesses a form that has fascinated human observers for generations. As each chamber was added, the spiral expanded while preserving its overall proportions. The result resembles the logarithmic patterns celebrated in art, architecture, and mathematics across many cultures. What later appeared as an emblem of natural beauty began as practical engineering, allowing buoyancy chambers to increase in size without sacrificing stability or efficiency. Grace emerged naturally from function, shaped not by intention but by the patient refinement of evolution. For tens of millions of years, this design prospered across nearly every marine environment on Earth. It survived shifting coastlines, changing climates, and the continual rearrangement of continents. Generation after generation drifted through the seas in numbers that left an enduring geological signature beneath future landscapes. Yet despite that astonishing success, every ammonite lineage eventually vanished. When the great asteroid struck at the close of the age of dinosaurs, the entire radiation disappeared. None survived into the modern ocean. Their shells remained scattered through ancient stone, preserving the memory of the prey that sustained one of the richest marine worlds our planet has ever known. Some stories grow larger than the evidence that first inspired them. Across museums, books, and television screens, one Jurassic predator became known not only for the fossils it left behind, but for a measurement that lingered in public imagination long after scientists had questioned it. Few prehistoric animals illustrate the distance between scientific evidence and popular memory more clearly than Liopleurodon. During the closing years of the 20th century, the documentary series Walking with Dinosaurs introduced audiences around the world to a colossal marine hunter. Broadcast in the year 1999, The program portrayed Leopleurodon as reaching approximately 25 meters, which is about 82 feet, in total length. The sequence became one of the defining moments of natural history, television. For millions of viewers, the image of a predator, larger than almost anything else to have ever lived, became inseparable from the animal itself. The measurement spread far beyond scientific circles, repeated so often that it gradually came to seem like established fact. Its origin, however, rested upon surprisingly limited evidence. The enormous estimate had been extrapolated from a single isolated tooth. At first glance, such reasoning appears understandable. Larger predators often possess larger teeth, yet marine reptiles do not follow such simple mathematical relationships. Tooth dimensions vary considerably among individuals, even within the same species. Growth patterns differ. Skull proportions shift. Body size does not increase in perfectly predictable proportion to dental measurements. An isolated tooth, therefore, provides one of the least dependable foundations from which to reconstruct the length of an entire animal. As additional fossils were studied, including skull material and numerous skeletal elements from multiple specimens, a far more consistent picture emerged. The strongest available evidence places Leopleurodon between approximately 6 meters, which is about 20 feet, and 10 meters, which is about 33 feet, in total length. That revision reduced the legendary estimate dramatically, yet it did nothing to diminish the remarkable predator revealed by the fossil record. Even at those dimensions, Leopleurodon remained among the dominant hunters of the Middle Jurassic seas. Its world extended across warm, shallow waters, covering regions that are now England, France, and Germany. During that distant age, those familiar landscapes existed beneath broad tropical seas, scattered among islands, rather than forming the continuous land seen today. Within those productive waters, Leopleurodon shared its environment with other formidable marine reptiles, rather than ruling an empty ocean alone. Giant ichthyosaurs pursued prey through deeper layers. Long-necked plesiosaurs searched different hunting grounds. Other pliosaurs competed for similar food resources. Every successful hunt unfolded within a crowded community shaped by constant ecological interaction. Years after the celebrated documentary first aired, a later production acknowledged that the famous estimate had been, in its own understated words, a little optimistic. By then, the larger figure had already become deeply rooted in popular culture. What remained striking was that the more accurate scientific estimates had existed in published research before the original program reached audiences. The correction arrived only after the larger number had taken on a life of its own. Yet the genuine animal proves richer than the legend that surrounded it. A predator measuring between 6 meters, which is about 20 feet, and 10 meters, which is about 33 feet, leaves behind more than an impressive statistic. It occupies a precise place within a living ecosystem whose outlines can still be reconstructed from stone. Fossilized bite marks, skeletal remains, and the distribution of prey reveal relationships extending across millions of years. The oversized myth offers little beyond astonishment. The authentic Leopleurodon carries something far more enduring, a history connected to real coastlines, real competitors, and real animals whose lives became intertwined within one of the most extraordinary oceans Earth has ever known. A traveler standing upon the hills of modern Europe might struggle to imagine that every step rests upon the memory of a vanished sea. Forests, villages, fields, and cities now occupy landscapes that once existed beneath warm salt water. During the Jurassic, the familiar outline of the continent had not yet emerged. Instead of a continuous landmass, The region consisted of scattered tropical islands, separated by broad expanses of shallow ocean, positioned at roughly the latitude occupied today by the Caribbean. The places now called England and France did not overlook the sea. They lay beneath it. Sunlight reached the seabed with remarkable clarity across vast areas, nourishing rich communities of marine life. Farther east, the land destined to become Germany appeared only as chains of low islands rising above sheltered lagoons and winding channels. The towering Alps had not yet begun their ascent. The rocks that would eventually be lifted into snowy peaks still rested beneath layers of seawater, collecting sediments, grain by grain, across immense stretches of time. This was not the deep ocean encountered far from continental margins. It belonged to a broad epicontinental sea, extending across flooded land in waters shallow enough for light to penetrate almost everywhere. Warm conditions encouraged remarkable biological productivity, while restricted circulation allowed some deeper layers to lose much of their dissolved oxygen. Within those oxygen-poor environments, dead organisms settled gently onto the seabed with remarkably little disturbance. Flesh disappeared, yet delicate skeletons remained protected beneath fine sediment, preserving extraordinary detail that would survive for millions of years. That remarkable preservation eventually became one of Europe's greatest scientific treasures. Fossils recovered from these deposits reveal complete marine reptiles, fragile ammonite shells, slender belemnite guards, graceful crinoids, and countless other organisms whose bodies would rarely survive under more turbulent conditions. The ancient seabed became an archive, recording not isolated moments but entire ecosystems that flourished beneath tropical skies long before the first flowering plants spread across the land. The transformation continued long after those animals vanished. Layer upon layer of sediment compressed beneath its own weight, until loose mud hardened into limestone. Across succeeding ages, tectonic forces lifted those marine deposits above sea level, where generations of people discovered them not as ocean floor, but as useful building stone. Some of the oldest colleges at the University of Oxford were constructed from limestone formed within those Jurassic seas. Walls admired for their history and craftsmanship consist of compressed remains from ancient marine environments. Fossil fragments of ammonites, belemnites, crinoids, and countless smaller organisms became part of the stone itself. The buildings stand upon land created by the sea, while also being fashioned from the sea. Along the Dorset coast, erosion continues, revealing this distant history. Cliffs, stretching for approximately 153 kilometers, which is about 95 miles, expose successive layers of Jurassic rock to wind and waves. Each winter, storms loosen fresh fossils from those ancient sediments, allowing ammonite shells and other marine remains to tumble onto the beaches below. Visitors often gather these weathered treasures without realizing they once belonged to animals drifting through tropical waters above the very ground where they now walk. The Dorset coastline itself has changed remarkably since that distant age. During the Jurassic, its latitude resembled that of the modern Mediterranean, warmed by abundant sunshine and influenced by nearby tropical seas. Today, the climate is cooler, the landscape greener, and the surrounding waters very different. The rocks, however, remain the same. They preserve conditions belonging to another Earth, separated from the present not only by time, but by geography itself. Every marine reptile, every ammonite, every belemnite, and every immense filter-feeding fish, described throughout this journey, crossed waters that later hardened into the foundations beneath London, Paris, and Berlin. This is not poetic invention. It is the patient record preserved by stratigraphy, where ancient oceans became stone and stone became the ground beneath familiar cities. Not every corner of the Jurassic Ocean left the same memory behind. Vast stretches vanished almost without a trace, while certain places preserved life with astonishing fidelity. The difference did not lie in the creatures themselves, but in the conditions awaiting them after death. Most bodies disappeared into scavengers, currents, and decay. Only under unusually favorable circumstances could an entire animal remain long enough for stone to begin replacing flesh, preserving details that would otherwise have been lost forever. Paleontologists use a German word for these extraordinary places, Lagerstätte, meaning a storage place or mother lode. The name reflects far more than abundance. It describes locations where fossils preserve not merely skeletons but entire moments of biological existence. Skin outlines, stomach contents, impressions of soft tissues, unborn, young, and even behavior can survive when geology and chemistry cooperate with remarkable precision. These deposits function almost like natural archives, preserving fragments of vanished ecosystems with a level of completeness found in very few places across Earth's history. Among the most celebrated of these archives is the Holzmaden Formation in what is now Baden-Württemberg, Germany. During the Jurassic, this region rested beneath a warm marine basin whose deeper waters contained very little dissolved oxygen. Animals settling onto that seafloor encountered few scavengers and little disturbance. Fine sediment accumulated around them with remarkable gentleness until their bodies became sealed beneath successive layers. Millions of years later, paleontologists uncovered ichthyosaurs whose streamlined bodies remained outlined by delicate carbon films surrounding the bones. Their dorsal fins, crescent-shaped tail fins, and graceful profiles were preserved with astonishing clarity. Without these fossils, researchers could confidently reconstruct the skeleton, yet the external appearance of the living animal would have remained largely speculative. Nearby deposits, known as the Posidonia Shale, reveal another remarkable chapter. Several specimens of the Ichthyosaur stenopterygius preserve embryos within the body cavity, demonstrating beyond doubt that these marine reptiles gave birth beneath the waves rather than returning to land. One fossil records an unborn offspring positioned within the birth canal. Another preserves an infant already emerging into the surrounding water, when both mother and offspring perished together. Stone retained not merely anatomy, but a single irreversible instant from a life that ended approximately 180 million years ago. Farther south, another exceptional environment developed within sheltered lagoons across what is now Bavaria. The Solnhofen limestone formed where fine lime mud accumulated across basin floors, largely isolated from vigorous circulation. Elevated salt concentrations and limited oxygen discouraged scavenging while preserving even the most delicate organisms. The celebrated Archaeopteryx emerged from these deposits, yet it shared this remarkable preservation with fishes, pterosaurs, marine invertebrates, and many smaller forms whose soft tissues survived in extraordinary detail. Fine anatomical structures, ordinarily erased within days, endured across immense spans of geological time because the surrounding sediment captured them before decomposition could complete its work. These remarkable sites illuminate one important truth about the Jurassic world. Our understanding is not distributed evenly across every habitat. Shallow European seas blessed with exceptional preservation reveal extraordinary richness, while the open ocean and deeper waters remain comparatively elusive because the conditions required to preserve complete organisms occurred far less often. Entire ecosystems undoubtedly existed beyond the reach of these archives, leaving only scattered fragments to suggest their presence. Each fossil, therefore, represents far more than an individual animal. It reflects an improbable sequence of circumstances extending from the instant life ended to the slow transformation of sediment into stone. Every outline, every embryo, every preserved stomach, and every delicate fin survives because decay paused long enough for geology to take over. The Jurassic Ocean that reaches us today is, in many ways, a gallery of stone portraits, each preserved by a fortunate meeting between life, death, chemistry, and time. There were intervals when the Jurassic Ocean seemed full of movement near the surface, while something very different unfolded far below. Beneath thriving waters, entire stretches of seafloor gradually lost the dissolved oxygen required for most complex life. These episodes are known as oceanic anoxic events, periods when vast marine environments became deprived of oxygen so completely that familiar patterns of decay and recycling nearly ceased. They rank among the most profound environmental disruptions preserved in the geological record, altering ecosystems across immense distances while leaving behind an unexpected legacy for those who would study them millions of years later. For animals dependent upon dissolved oxygen, the consequences reached every level of the ecosystem. Burrowing organisms disappeared from affected sediments. Scavengers no longer searched across the bottom for fallen remains. Many forms of bacteria that ordinarily dismantled organic material could no longer function with their usual efficiency. The familiar cycle in which life returned its building blocks to the surrounding environment slowed dramatically. Sediment accumulated in largely undisturbed layers, each one resting gently upon the last, preserving a record that remained remarkably intact beneath the water. Several natural processes combined to produce these unusual conditions. Warm seawater cannot retain as much dissolved oxygen as colder water, and the Jurassic world remained warmer than the oceans familiar today. Elevated concentrations of carbon dioxide contributed additional warming while also influencing the chemistry of seawater itself. At the same time, flourishing microscopic life near the surface generated extraordinary quantities of organic material. As that material drifted downward and decomposed, it consumed dissolved oxygen faster than circulation could replace it. The remarkable productivity that nourished the upper ocean gradually deprived the deeper waters beneath it, creating an unexpected consequence born from abundance rather than scarcity. Some of these oxygen-depleted regions reached astonishing dimensions. Geological evidence indicates that certain episodes extended across areas comparable to modern ocean basins, persisting not for seasons or generations, but for thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of years. Throughout those immense spans, marine communities adapted where they could, retreated where possible, or vanished from affected habitats altogether. The ocean remained alive, yet its living layers became unevenly distributed, with vigorous ecosystems above and biologically diminished depths below. For the animals swimming through sunlit waters, these conditions reshaped migration routes, feeding grounds, and ecological relationships. Water chemistry shifted, food webs reorganized. Entire local communities experienced periods of decline before recovering or giving way to different assemblages of species. Yet, when an ichthyosaur, an ammonite, a fish, or another inhabitant eventually descended after death into one of these oxygen-deprived basins, an entirely different process began. Without the usual abundance of scavengers and decomposers, the body often remained largely undisturbed. Fine sediment settled across skin, fins, stomach contents, and delicate anatomical structures before currents or feeding animals could scatter them. Over immense spans of time, minerals gradually replaced organic material while preserving astonishing detail. Carbon films traced the outlines of bodies. Internal organs sometimes left faint signatures. Embryos remained within their mothers. The final meal of a hunter stayed inside the digestive tract. Stone accomplished what ordinary decay almost never allows. A remarkable paradox emerges from these ancient deposits. The environments most hostile to thriving marine life became the environments most generous to memory. Conditions capable of disrupting ecosystems also protected their history with extraordinary precision. The portraits recovered from celebrated fossil sites owe their existence to intervals when parts of the Jurassic Ocean could no longer sustain the ordinary rhythms of life and decay. That enduring contrast lingers beneath every beautifully preserved fossil. The same ocean that nurtured immense predators, countless schools of prey, and flourishing tropical seas also possessed the capacity to transform portions of itself into places where ordinary biological activity nearly ceased. From those intervals of chemical imbalance came some of the clearest windows into a vanished world, allowing its inhabitants to remain recognizable across almost unimaginable depths of time. There is one realm of the Jurassic Ocean that remains almost entirely beyond our reach. Every remarkable fossil deposit explored so far, every beautifully preserved skeleton, every outline of skin or fin, every embryo resting within its mother, comes from comparatively shallow marine environments. Ancient continental shelves, sheltered lagoons, broad inland seas, and coastal basins have spoken across immense spans of time. The deepest ocean has remained almost completely absent from that conversation, preserving its history in a manner that ultimately erased it. The famous fossil localities each shared one important characteristic. The Holzmaden Formation, the Posidonia Shale, the Solnhofen Limestone, the Oxford Clay, and the marine rocks of Svalbard all formed within waters connected to continental margins rather than the Great Abyss. They reveal ecosystems flourishing, where sediment could accumulate upon stable foundations, destined to become part of the continents themselves. Those settings produced extraordinary archives because the rocks survived the passing of geological ages. Far beyond those ancient coastlines, however, the seafloor followed a very different destiny. Oceanic crust is never permanent. It forms continuously along underwater mountain chains where molten rock rises from within the planet. From there, it drifts outward across millions of years, carrying the deep seafloor slowly toward distant continental margins. Eventually, that crust bends downward and disappears beneath another tectonic plate, descending into the mantle where heat and pressure consume it completely. The average lifespan of oceanic crust is approximately 100 million years, which is about 62 million miles. Long before the present day arrived, nearly every fragment of deep Jurassic seafloor had already completed that journey. The consequence reaches far beyond geology alone. The abyssal plains that existed approximately 176 million years ago have almost entirely vanished from the planet. Their sediment, their volcanic foundations, and the fossils they may once have contained have been carried downward until no accessible record remains. The very ground upon which the deepest Jurassic communities lived has itself disappeared. Unlike the continental rocks that patiently preserved ancient coastlines, the abyss erased the pages upon which its history had been written. Yet, absence does not imply emptiness. Modern oceans reveal that deep ecosystems depend upon an unending descent of organic material from productive surface waters. Countless microscopic remains, fragments of larger organisms, and drifting particles gradually settle through the water column in a phenomenon known as marine snow. The Jurassic Sea supported extraordinary biological abundance near its sunlit surface. That abundance must also have produced a continual rain of nourishment sinking toward the darkness below. Across immense depths, unseen communities almost certainly depended upon that falling harvest, transforming it into entirely different webs of life. Earlier, the great-eyed ichthyosaurs descended to approximately 600 meters, that is nearly 1,969 feet, reaching a realm beyond ordinary sunlight before returning to breathe at the surface. Even those remarkable divers explored only a fraction of the ocean beneath them. Below that depth stretched several additional kilometers, which is about 1.9 miles, of water where crushing pressure increased without interruption, and daylight never arrived. Whatever evolved there occupied an environment untouched by every fossil deposit that has illuminated the shallower Jurassic Sea. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not hidden because it was too delicate to preserve, nor because paleontologists have failed to search diligently enough. It is hidden because the mechanism required to preserve and recover its evidence has itself been destroyed. The planet continually renewed its ocean floor, carrying the oldest abyss back into its own interior. Entire communities endured across tens of millions of years, adapted to darkness, immense pressure, and perpetual descent from the productive waters above. Their world existed for an immense span of Earth's history, yet almost every physical trace vanished with the stone beneath them, leaving only the certainty that an unseen chapter once unfolded there. Not every vanished world disappeared because its inhabitants became extinct. Some disappeared because the stage itself was dismantled, piece by piece, until no map could ever show it again. The greatest ocean of the Jurassic belongs to that kind of absence, remembered not through living water, but through the scattered traces it left across continents that were once joined by its shores. Every ocean recognized today is remarkably young when measured against the deeper rhythms of Earth's history. The Atlantic Ocean began opening approximately 180 million years ago. The Indian Ocean is younger still. Even the Pacific Ocean, which preserves the oldest surviving stretches of oceanic crust, has already surrendered its earliest floor to subduction. None of these oceans is the one that sustained the extraordinary marine world explored throughout this journey. Their coastlines, currents, and chemistry belong to a different chapter of planetary history. The ocean that nurtured the Jurassic biosphere was the Tethys Sea, extending from east to west across the equatorial belt between the great northern and southern land masses. Rather than occupying isolated basins separated by continents, it formed an immense tropical corridor connecting regions that would eventually become parts of both the Atlantic and Pacific. Warm water could travel enormous distances without encountering polar barriers, carrying energy and nutrients across an uninterrupted equatorial pathway that embraced much of the planet's middle latitudes. Its position granted an advantage unlike that of any modern ocean. Throughout the year, sunlight arrived with remarkable consistency across its broad east to west extent. No vast northern reaches extended toward freezing conditions. No southern extremities approached polar darkness. Without those structural limitations, the Tethys maintained widespread warmth on a planetary scale. The ocean became an immense reservoir of heat, encouraging vigorous biological productivity from one shoreline to another and sustaining ecosystems that flourished over millions of years. Those warm waters did far more than nourish individual species. Ocean circulation carried heat throughout the globe, influencing atmospheric movement, distributing dissolved nutrients, and shaping the chemistry upon which marine organisms depended. Every drifting current became part of a larger planetary system, linking distant coastlines into a shared environmental network. The abundance seen throughout Jurassic fossil deposits was not the product of isolated seas acting independently. It reflected an interconnected ocean whose circulation influenced nearly every marine habitat on Earth. Nothing that large remains unchanged forever. As immense intervals of time unfolded, the continents continued their gradual migration. Africa advanced northward. India began its remarkable passage from the southern hemisphere toward Asia. Their movement steadily narrowed the once expansive Tethys. Broad marine passages became constricted waterways. Open connections fragmented into enclosed basins. The continuous equatorial circulation that had defined the Jurassic world weakened as advancing land interrupted routes that had endured across millions of years. Each stage of that transformation altered the climate as well as the geography. Currents shifted into unfamiliar patterns. Heat moved differently between ocean and atmosphere. Marine habitats that had once remained connected became isolated from one another. Evolution continued adapting to those changing conditions, but the distinctive environmental framework that had supported the Jurassic seas gradually disappeared as continental collisions reshaped the face of the planet. Today, the Mediterranean Sea preserves only a modest reminder of that immense predecessor. Surrounded by land and comparatively small in scale, it retains a lingering connection to the ancient Tethys while existing within an entirely different geological setting. Its warm waters no longer drive planetary circulation, yet they occupy part of the pathway once traveled by an ocean that influenced climates across the globe. Looking across the modern Mediterranean is therefore an encounter with deep time expressed through geography itself. Beneath familiar coastlines lies the fading outline of a vanished ocean whose currents carried giant reptiles, immense fishes, drifting ammonites, and countless other forms of life through waters unlike any that remain. The sea itself has passed from the earth, yet its memory survives in stone, in mountain ranges lifted from its floor, and in the enduring record of the remarkable world it once sustained. Long before familiar coral cities spread across tropical seas, another architecture covered broad stretches of the Jurassic seafloor. Its builders belonged to lineages that still have distant descendants today, yet the communities they created have no true modern counterpart. Their reefs rose gradually through patient accumulation, forming living landscapes whose appearance would have challenged every expectation carried by a diver from the present day. Modern reef ecosystems are shaped primarily by stony corals, organisms that construct limestone skeletons while living in close partnership with microscopic algae powered by sunlight. Their branching colonies, massive domes, and intricate labyrinths define many of today's tropical coastlines. During the Jurassic, those corals were already present, but across much of the ocean, they had not yet become the dominant engineers of marine habitat. Instead, the greatest structural foundations belong to calcareous sponges, including remarkable lithostid forms whose mineral skeletons interlocked into dense frameworks extending across the seafloor. Alongside them flourished stromatoporoids, colonial sponge-related organisms that slowly produced broad layered skeletons, each generation building upon the last. Rather than growing into delicate branching forests, these communities often formed rounded mounds, terraces, and gently undulating ridges. Over immense spans of time, countless individual lives became continuous stone, creating stable platforms that sheltered entire ecosystems. The reef itself was not a single organism, but a vast collaboration, assembled gradually through the persistent work of innumerable builders. In some settings, another, even more ancient contributor strengthened those living foundations. Microbial mats spread across exposed surfaces, their microscopic inhabitants trapping sediment while encouraging minerals to accumulate in thin successive layers. These structures, known as stromatolites, represented one of the oldest successful biological constructions on Earth, their ancestry reaching back billions of years before the Jurassic. Their continued presence revealed that some of the planet's earliest ecological strategies still remained woven into a world otherwise filled with comparatively recent evolutionary innovations. The spaces between these mineral frameworks supported communities unlike those found in modern reefs. Brachiopods anchored themselves to firm surfaces, filtering nourishment from passing water. Feather-like crinoids extended graceful crowns into gentle currents. Echinoids traveled across the reef in search of food, while specialized ammonites drifted above, occupying ecological roles that varied from one species to another. Countless smaller creatures inhabited crevices and sheltered passages, many belonging to evolutionary branches that have since vanished completely. Their relationships formed an intricate web sustained by generations of adaptation unique to this vanished marine landscape. Seen together, these organisms created scenery that would have appeared almost unfamiliar to present eyes. The overall form lacked the recognizable outlines of modern coral gardens. Growth patterns followed different geometries. Surfaces displayed textures produced by sponge skeletons rather than branching coral colonies. The arrangement of life reflected evolutionary experiments that unfolded under environmental conditions unlike those governing today's oceans. Every direction would reveal combinations of forms assembled from lineages that either dwindled into obscurity or disappeared entirely across later chapters of Earth's history. This ancient reef world was not merely an early draft awaiting refinement into the ecosystems of the present. It represented a complete and successful system in its own right, balanced according to relationships that persisted across millions of years. Predators hunted among its structures, drifting animals found shelter within its passages, and generations of builders continued adding fresh layers that slowly reshaped the seafloor beneath them. Stability emerged through continuity rather than permanence, each living surface preparing the foundation upon which later communities would grow. Yet even these enduring landscapes proved temporary when measured against geological time. Environmental change gradually altered the conditions that had favored their remarkable construction. Many of the dominant reef builders failed to persist beyond the transition into later periods, leaving ecological spaces that different organisms would eventually occupy. The reefs that followed belonged to another world with another caste of builders. The sponge cities of the Jurassic did not transform into modern coral reefs. They concluded their own long history, leaving behind only stone, fossils, and the enduring outline of an ocean whose living architecture has never returned. Nothing in the Jurassic world remained fixed, even while its oceans seemed immeasurably enduring. Beneath every coastline and beneath every thriving marine community, the planet continued its slow work of rearrangement. Changes too gradual for any living creature to witness within a lifetime accumulated across millions of years until familiar coastlines drifted apart, ancient connections weakened, and the foundations of entire ecosystems began to shift. Throughout the Middle and Late Jurassic, the great continental assembly inherited from earlier ages continued to fracture with increasing momentum. Forces that had been gathering since the Permian were no longer hidden within the crust alone. Their effects became visible across the face of the Earth itself. Between North America and Europe, The northern Atlantic rift steadily extended southward as fresh ocean floor emerged along the spreading ridge. New crust formed continuously, gently separating the continents by only a few centimeters each year. Across a single lifetime, that movement was almost imperceptible. Across 1 million years, it amounted to tens of kilometers, which is about 12 to 62 miles, depending upon the interval considered. Across the span of the Jurassic, entire coastlines found themselves occupying different positions on the globe. The retreat of old shorelines created opportunities as remarkable as the losses unfolding elsewhere. As continents separated, newly flooded shelves welcomed warm seawater into landscapes that had once been dry land. Broad, shallow seas spread across low-lying regions, creating fresh habitats illuminated by sunlight and enriched by circulating nutrients. Marine organisms expanded into these emerging environments, diversifying as each new basin developed its own character. The same tectonic forces dismantling ancient arrangements were also providing space for entirely new ecological communities to flourish. Meanwhile, the Tethys continued to experience mounting pressure from opposite directions. Africa advanced steadily toward the north, while India maintained its extraordinary journey across the southern hemisphere toward Asia. Each movement narrowed portions of the vast equatorial seaway that had once linked distant oceans into a nearly continuous tropical circulation. Water still flowed through its remaining passages, yet those pathways became progressively more restricted as continental margins approached one another over immense intervals of geological time. Currents responded to every adjustment. Heat traveled along altered routes. Nutrients accumulated in different places than before. Regions that had remained favorable for countless generations gradually developed new environmental conditions. Species perfectly adapted to long-established patterns encountered habitats that no longer behaved as they once had. Evolution answered these changes continuously, producing new forms while others diminished or disappeared, not through sudden catastrophe, but through persistent environmental transformation unfolding across millions of years. The Jurassic, therefore, was never a motionless chapter preserved unchanged between its beginning and its conclusion. Communities inhabiting the earliest part of the period differed from those flourishing near its end. Predators rose and declined. Prey diversified into fresh ecological roles. Reef builders shifted with changing seas. Every generation inherited a world already moving beneath it, shaped by geological forces operating with immense patience yet undeniable consequence. What remains especially remarkable is not that change eventually arrived, because change defines every ocean that has ever existed. The extraordinary achievement of the Jurassic lay in its resilience. For approximately 56 million years, ecosystems adapted repeatedly to moving continents, evolving coastlines, and shifting currents, while maintaining an astonishing diversity of marine predators, unmatched in any later ocean. That balance endured through continual adjustment rather than permanence, demonstrating the remarkable flexibility of life when granted sufficient time. Yet even resilience possesses natural limits. The same restless tectonic processes that opened new seas and sustained evolutionary opportunity also continued dismantling the environmental framework upon which those remarkable communities depended. The stage itself was withdrawing, almost too gradually to perceive, until the conditions that had supported the greatest concentration of marine predators in Earth's history no longer existed in the form that had once allowed them to flourish. Their world faded not in a single moment, but through the patient persistence of a planet that never truly stands still. There are moments in Earth's history that arrive without fire from the sky or mountains breaking apart, yet they divide one world from another with equal permanence. The close of the Jurassic belongs to that quieter kind of turning point. Life did not halt in a single instant, but the living pattern that had defined the oceans for tens of millions of years gradually gave way to something that would never again assume the same form. Approximately 145 million years ago, the Jurassic yielded to the Cretaceous. Geologists recognize this boundary not through evidence of one overwhelming catastrophe, but through the changing composition of the fossil record itself. Species that had flourished for immense spans vanished from succeeding layers of stone. Others appeared for the first time, carrying different adaptations into oceans whose conditions were slowly being rewritten. The rocks preserve this transition with remarkable fidelity, recording not merely the passage of time, but the changing identity of an entire biosphere. Among the greatest transformations was the decline of the pliosaurs. For roughly 70 million years, these immense marine reptiles had occupied the highest levels of oceanic predation. Generation after generation inherited waters shaped by their presence. Their descendants diversified into forms of extraordinary power, culminating in animals whose anatomy represented the most formidable expression of their lineage. Then, within the geological interval surrounding the Jurassic and Cretaceous boundary, that remarkable dynasty largely disappeared. Some relatives survived into the earliest part of the Cretaceous, preserving fragments of their ancestral design. Yet these remaining species no longer reflected the diversity, abundance, geographical reach, or exceptional size that had characterized the Jurassic assemblage. The ecological network, sustained by numerous large pliosaurs across vast regions of the global ocean, contracted until only diminished representatives remained. The flourishing guild that had once dominated marine food webs ceased to exist in the form that had defined an entire period of Earth's history. The consequences extended far beyond the disappearance of individual species. For millions of years, the upper levels of the marine ecosystem had been organized around predators possessing immense skulls, 4 powerful flippers, and bite forces unmatched within the known history of the oceans. Their influence reached downward through every level of the food web, shaping prey populations, competitive relationships, and patterns of survival. When that long-established architecture dissolved, the ecological position it had occupied no longer belonged to the same kind of animal. The framework itself had changed. Exactly why this transformation occurred remains uncertain. Evidence points towards several processes acting together rather than a single decisive cause. Ocean circulation continued evolving as continental movement altered the shape of marine basins. Changes in currents likely influenced the distribution of prey species upon which large predators depended. Expanding evolutionary lineages entering the developing Cretaceous seas may also have introduced new forms of ecological competition. At the same time, the gradual disruption of the Tethys altered the environmental conditions that had supported Jurassic marine ecosystems across immense distances. Each explanation is supported by meaningful evidence, yet none alone accounts completely for the disappearance of the great pliosaur communities. The fossil record preserves consistent clues while withholding complete certainty. Such uncertainty is itself part of paleontology, reminding us that deep time often records outcomes more clearly than it records every step leading toward them. One conclusion, however, stands with remarkable confidence. The ocean emerging on the Cretaceous side of the boundary was fundamentally different from the one that had flourished before it. Its defining predator lineage had faded. The intricate ecological arrangement that sustained giant pliosaurs across warm global seas belonged to an earlier chapter that had reached its conclusion. Life continued with extraordinary richness, adapting once again to changing conditions, but the distinctive balance that characterized the Jurassic never returned. Like the vanished currents that had once bound distant waters together, its greatest marine dynasty became part of the irreversible memory of the planet. Some lineages seem to acquire the appearance of permanence simply because they endure for spans of time so immense that change itself begins to look temporary beside them. The ichthyosaurs earned that illusion. Across successive ages, while continents shifted, oceans altered their pathways, and entire communities rose and faded. These marine reptiles continued to inhabit the seas with remarkable consistency, adapting again and again to a changing planet without surrendering their place within it. Their story had begun long before the closing chapters of the Jurassic. They entered the oceans during the early Triassic, after the greatest biological crisis Earth has ever experienced. The Permian-Triassic extinction erased the overwhelming majority of marine species, restructuring nearly every ecosystem on the planet. Yet from the recovering world emerged the ancestors of the ichthyosaurs, beginning a history that would ultimately extend for approximately 160 million years. They survived another profound transition at the boundary between the Triassic and the Jurassic, when many other groups disappeared. They flourished through the long interval that followed, becoming among the most accomplished marine reptiles ever to evolve. Their bodies became increasingly refined for movement through water. Their immense eyes gathered the faintest available light, and their lives unfolded entirely within the sea. Earlier generations had already left the land behind so completely that even reproduction occurred beneath the waves, with mothers giving birth to living young instead of returning to shore. They endured the transformation that brought the Jurassic to its conclusion. As the great pliosaur communities diminished and the structure of the ocean shifted, ichthyosaurs continued swimming through waters that were steadily assuming a different character. Their persistence suggested extraordinary resilience, judged only by their ability to survive periods that ended so many other lineages. They stood among the greatest long-term survivors known within the history of large vertebrate life. Then their record changed. During the early Cretaceous, the diversity of ichthyosaurs slowly diminished. Fewer species appeared within newly formed sediments. Their geographical distribution became increasingly restricted. The decline unfolded gradually rather than suddenly, leaving no unmistakable horizon in the rocks, where thriving populations were replaced by absence. Eventually, approximately 90 to 93 million years ago, the final representative vanished during the age now known as the Cenomanian. There was no globally recognized mass extinction marking that moment. No single impact scar announced the conclusion of their history. No overwhelming volcanic catastrophe clearly coincided with their disappearance. Instead, paleontologists are left with several carefully considered explanations, each supported by meaningful evidence, yet none providing a complete answer. Expanding groups of marine reptiles may have competed for similar prey. Changes affecting belemnite populations may have reduced an important food source for certain ichthyosaurs. Alterations in ocean circulation, chemistry, and long-established temperature patterns could have undermined physiological adaptations refined across immense spans of evolutionary time. Each possibility fits part of the evidence, While the complete sequence remains beyond certain reconstruction, what remains unmistakable is the finality of the outcome. The lineage did not persist in smaller descendants. It did not transform into another recognizable branch of marine reptiles. Its defining characteristics disappeared together. The enormous eyes capable of gathering dim light from deep water vanished. The powerful bodies adapted for prolonged diving disappeared. The remarkable pattern of underwater birth ended with the final generation. Every adaptation accumulated across approximately 160 million years ceased to continue beyond that point. Since then, every ocean has existed without ichthyosaurs. Their absence now stretches across a span of time approaching half the duration of their own remarkable history. The seas remain filled with swift swimmers, accomplished hunters, and elegant divers, yet none belong to that ancient lineage which once crossed nearly every marine basin on Earth. The waters still rise and fall beneath the same moon, but one enduring rhythm of life, maintained across unimaginable ages, concluded so completely that only stone continues to remember it. An ocean does not instruct its inhabitants with words. It offers only resistance, pressure, distance, and the unyielding demands of motion. Across immense spans of geological time, those demands shaped bodies again and again, guiding unrelated creatures toward remarkably similar forms. The result appears almost intentional, although it emerged from countless generations, responding to the same physical realities beneath the surface. By the height of the Jurassic, this pattern had become unmistakable. At least 4 separate vertebrate lineages had entered the sea from different terrestrial beginnings and, through entirely independent histories, transformed into large, air-breathing predators of the open water. Ichthyosaurs followed one path. Plesiosaurs and the shorter-necked pliosaurs followed another. The marine crocodilian relatives, known as Thalattosuchia, arrived through their own sequence of adaptations. Much later, during the Cretaceous, the mosasaurs would complete the pattern from yet another ancestral starting point. None of these groups inherited their marine bodies from a shared ocean-dwelling ancestor. Their earliest forebears walked upon land with very different skeletons, muscles, and lifestyles. Between those beginnings and their eventual mastery of the sea lay millions of years of gradual transformation, each lineage responding to its own history while facing the same surrounding world. The routes differed, yet the destination became strikingly familiar. Their bodies grew smoother and more streamlined. Limbs evolved into structures capable of efficient propulsion through dense water rather than across solid ground. Powerful tails or coordinated flippers generated thrust with increasing economy. Lungs supported prolonged dives, allowing these reptiles to remain submerged for extended intervals before returning to the surface for another breath. Even their overall sizes often settled within a similar range, suited to dominating marine food webs, where speed, endurance, and momentum determined success. The resemblance extends beyond the reptiles of the Jurassic. Modern tuna, dolphins, and ichthyosaurs share no close recent aquatic ancestry, yet their overall outlines appear astonishingly alike. A tapered head divides the water with minimal resistance. The body reaches its greatest depth near the center before narrowing toward the principal source of propulsion. Fins or flippers stabilize movement while reducing unnecessary drag. These similarities are not borrowed from one another. They emerged independently because water rewards certain shapes with extraordinary efficiency while imposing steady penalties upon less effective designs. The same principle appears when comparing the largest pliosaurs with the living sperm whale. Their ancestry is entirely separate. One belongs to an ancient reptilian lineage, the other to mammals whose distant relatives once walked upon land. Their bones differ, their internal anatomy differs, and their evolutionary journeys unfolded across widely separated chapters of Earth's history. Yet both became immense, air-breathing predators capable of descending into deep water before returning to the surface. Each occupied the summit of a marine ecosystem built upon abundant prey and vast expanses of ocean. Such repeated patterns reveal something profound about evolution itself. Adaptation is not an unlimited exploration of every imaginable possibility. The environment imposes boundaries, rewarding solutions that function well while steadily removing those that do not. The ocean possesses its own enduring logic, expressed through currents, buoyancy, pressure, and the immense cost of moving through water. Any lineage entering that realm encounters the same enduring constraints, regardless of its ancestry. Across the Jurassic, those constraints acted almost like an invisible sculptor. They guided unrelated animals toward comparable answers while preserving the distinct details of each lineage. Diversity remained immense, yet underlying forms echoed one another with remarkable consistency. The sea did not erase evolutionary history. Instead, it bent separate histories toward shared designs, demonstrating that the physical world shapes life as surely as life responds to the physical world. In that ancient ocean, the repeated emergence of similar predators became one of the clearest demonstrations that Earth does not merely provide a stage for evolution. Through its enduring forces, it participates in the creation of every form that learns to endure within it. Standing beside the modern ocean, it is easy to mistake familiarity for completeness. The tides continue their ancient rhythm. Waves still shape distant shores, and life still fills waters that cover most of Earth's surface. Yet the seas of today are only one expression of what an ocean can become. Long before our own age, the planet sustained a marine world assembled under conditions that no longer exist. The water itself remains, in broad chemical terms, much the same. Salt still dissolves within it. Currents still transport heat across immense distances. Buoyancy, pressure, and the resistance of water continue to obey the same physical principles that governed the Jurassic. What has changed is not the fundamental nature of the sea, but the living architecture constructed within it over millions of years of evolution. This difference does not diminish the extraordinary creatures inhabiting the modern world. The great white shark represents one of evolution's most refined pursuit predators, combining powerful senses with remarkable hydrodynamic efficiency. Sperm whales descend to depths approaching 3,000 meters, which is about 1,864 miles, while navigating rich social relationships and communicating across vast underwater distances. Orcas display adaptability, unlike almost any other marine hunter, cooperating with one another and developing regional traditions that shape how different populations capture prey. Even so, these remarkable animals occupy an ocean built upon a different foundation. No living creature fills the ecological position once held by the largest pliosaurs. No descendant carries forward the streamlined body plan perfected by the ichthyosaurs across approximately 160 million years. No fully marine crocodilian patrols the open sea. The remarkable arrangement that placed several independent groups of large, air-breathing reptilian predators within the same global ocean has no modern counterpart. That distinctive structure did not vanish in a single moment. The famous asteroid impact that marked the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction eliminated the final great marine reptile groups and permanently altered the course of evolution. Yet long before that catastrophe, the conditions supporting the Jurassic ecosystem had already begun to withdraw. The broad tropical seaways narrowed. Continental movement altered circulation patterns that had once distributed warmth across the planet. Extensive shallow seas gradually became less widespread, and habitats that had nurtured extraordinary diversity slowly disappeared. As those physical changes accumulated, biological communities adjusted with them. Some lineages expanded into newly available opportunities. Others declined as familiar conditions became increasingly uncommon. Extinction and adaptation unfolded together, guided not by intention, but by the continuous reshaping of Earth's surface. By the time the asteroid arrived, the ocean it struck was already profoundly different from the one that had once sustained the greatest concentration of marine reptile diversity in planetary history. The seas that followed were inherited by survivors. Mammals expanded into ecological roles left vacant. Modern sharks continued refining designs that had endured across many geological ages. New food webs formed from resilient lineages that persisted through repeated crises. The result was not an inferior ocean, nor a superior one. It was simply another chapter, created from different beginnings and governed by different evolutionary possibilities. Seen from that perspective, the Jurassic becomes more than a vanished interval within the geological record. It serves as a reference against which the creative potential of the ocean can be measured. It demonstrates how profoundly climate, geography, and evolution can combine to construct a world unlike any that came before or after. The modern sea remains astonishing in its richness and complexity, yet it also carries the memory of possibilities no longer present. Beneath every familiar wave lies the reminder that Earth's oceans have worn many faces, and that one of their greatest expressions now survives only in stone, patiently preserving the outline of a world that cannot return. The Jurassic has never truly departed from the world. Its waters withdrew, its living communities vanished, and its predators surrendered their place to time, yet the substance of that ocean remains woven into the landscapes of the present. What once drifted beneath warm seas now supports cities, forms coastlines, and rests unnoticed beneath countless footsteps. The ancient ocean survives by becoming something entirely different from the world in which it first existed. Across southern England, stone cut from Jurassic deposits has served generations of builders. Some of the oldest colleges of the University of Oxford stand behind walls fashioned from limestone that began as marine sediment settling through warm water over immense spans of time. Layer after layer accumulated across the ancient seafloor as ammonites, belemnites, crinoids, shells, and countless other marine organisms completed their lives and became part of an ever-thickening blanket of mineral-rich remains. Burial beneath younger sediments compressed those deposits until loose particles became solid rock. Much later, people quarried the stone, shaped it into blocks, and raised buildings that continue serving scholars many centuries after their construction. The walls belong to the present, yet their foundation was assembled beneath a vanished sea. The transformation did not end there. Across the narrow water separating England and France, the brilliant white cliffs rising above the coast preserve another chapter of marine history. They belong to the late Cretaceous rather than the Jurassic, yet they continue the same enduring story. Their dazzling brightness comes from the accumulated calcium carbonate remains of microscopic marine organisms that drifted through ancient seas in unimaginable numbers. Generation after generation settled toward the bottom, creating deposits that eventually hardened into towering cliffs overlooking the modern coast. A fragment of chalk held in the hand represents not a single organism, but the compressed remains of countless lives gathered together across geological time. Far beneath the waters of the North Sea, another inheritance waited far longer before revealing itself. Organic material from Jurassic and Cretaceous marine ecosystems became deeply buried beneath accumulating sediments. Heat and pressure slowly transformed that ancient biological matter into petroleum through processes unfolding across millions of years. The reserves eventually discovered beneath the seafloor fueled industries, powered transportation, and influenced economies throughout the 20th century. Every barrel drawn upward carries within it the altered remains of food webs sustained by oceans whose surface has long since disappeared. The energy released today began as sunlight captured by ancient marine life before passing through ecosystems inhabited by predators whose bones now rest within stone. Along the coast of Dorset, the conversation between sea and rock continues without interruption. Winter storms carve into cliffs composed of Jurassic sediments, exposing fossils that had remained enclosed since their burial. Ammonite shells emerge from the weathered rock and tumble onto the beaches below, where walkers discover them among ordinary stones. The spiral preserved within each fossil remains astonishingly complete, retaining proportions established by a living animal that once floated through tropical waters during an age when those shores lay beneath the sea instead of above it. Many of those fossils eventually find new homes upon shelves, desks, or windowsills. They become familiar objects, admired for their elegant geometry without requiring dramatic explanation. Yet every polished spiral represents a survivor of immense geological change. Continents shifted, oceans opened and closed, mountains rose where seafloors once rested. Entire evolutionary dynasties appeared and vanished while that single shell endured inside stone until erosion returned it to daylight. The Jurassic, therefore, persists not as memory alone, but as material reality. Its sediments became landscapes. Its living communities became architecture, coastlines, and reservoirs hidden beneath the earth. The ocean itself can no longer be crossed, yet fragments of it remain within the ordinary places of the modern world, waiting with remarkable patience for someone to recognize that ancient seas still surround us, transformed into the solid ground upon which the present quietly unfolds. Nothing about the Jurassic Ocean emerged by accident. It was the outcome of countless processes unfolding together across spans of time so immense that each depended upon events reaching far deeper into Earth's past. Remove any one of those conditions, and the remarkable marine world that flourished for millions of years could never have taken shape. The ocean that carried its immense predators was not simply warm or expansive. It existed because geology, evolution, chemistry, and climate briefly aligned in a combination that the planet has never assembled again. The arrangement of the continents formed the first requirement. The ancient supercontinent had begun to separate along fractures that opened new pathways for the sea, while preserving a broad tropical connection across the planet. The Tethys Sea occupied an equatorial position unlike any modern ocean, gathering steady solar energy throughout the year while linking distant marine basins into a continuous belt of warm water. Vast continental shelves flooded beneath rising seas, creating extensive, shallow environments where sunlight reached the bottom across enormous areas. Nutrients circulated through these broad marine platforms, supporting biological productivity on a scale that sustained entire communities, from microscopic plankton to the greatest hunters of their age. Since then, continents have continued their gradual movement. Their positions have changed, their coastlines have transformed, and their future paths lead toward entirely different arrangements. The geometry that once sustained the Jurassic seas cannot be reconstructed by the motions now guiding the planet. Life itself contributed another condition that cannot be repeated. Long before the Jurassic reached its height, terrestrial reptiles had diversified into numerous evolutionary experiments. Several unrelated branches gradually returned to the sea, each adapting through its own sequence of transformations until bodies once suited for land became masters of open water. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, marine crocodilians, and later marine lizards all emerged through separate histories while arriving at remarkably similar solutions for life within the ocean. Those ancestral branches have long since vanished. The surviving reptiles of the modern world belong to different lineages shaped by different opportunities and different constraints. Evolution continues without pause, yet it proceeds from the living forms that remain, never from those already lost. The extraordinary abundance of prey represented another essential foundation. Ammonites multiplied into astonishing diversity, filling ecological roles across the ancient sea. Belemnites gathered in immense populations, becoming one of the principal food sources supporting marine predators through successive generations. Their success depended upon favorable ocean chemistry, widespread warm water, and patterns of circulation that distributed nutrients through productive habitats. Both groups disappeared forever before the present world emerged. Their ecological positions have been replaced only in part by other organisms that occupy different relationships within modern marine ecosystems. Even the chemistry of the oceans participated in this singular balance. Elevated concentrations of carbon dioxide contributed to warmer global conditions, while extensive shallow seas encouraged biological productivity across continental margins. Ocean circulation transported heat and nutrients according to pathways established by continental positions that no longer exist. Geological activity, atmospheric composition, and marine ecosystems interacted continuously, each shaping the others through feedback extending across millions of years. None of these influences acted alone. Together, they created a setting capable of sustaining one of the most distinctive marine worlds the planet has ever known. Every requirement depended upon the presence of all the others. The Jurassic Ocean was therefore not an accidental gathering of extraordinary animals inhabiting an ordinary sea. It represented the precise outcome of circumstances unique to one chapter in Earth's history. That chapter endured for approximately 56 million years, an interval almost impossible to comprehend within the span of a human lifetime, yet only a brief passage within the deeper rhythm of planetary change. The continents continued their journey. Ancient lineages reached their endings. New oceans opened, while older ones disappeared beneath the restless crust. The world did not repeat what had come before. It carried forward the memory within stone, within fossils, and within the landscapes shaped from those forgotten seas, while continuing to compose new chapters from conditions unlike any that once gave rise to the Jurassic Ocean. A span of 56 million years is easy to pronounce and almost impossible to imagine. The phrase settles gently onto the page, carrying only a handful of words, yet behind it lies an interval so immense that ordinary experience offers no measure capable of containing it. Time at that scale does not pass like the turning of seasons or the rise and fall of generations. It accumulates beyond comparison until familiar ideas of beginning and ending lose their ordinary meaning. Recorded human history reaches back only about 6,000 years. Every kingdom raised from stone, every empire that stretched across continents, every library, temple, harbor, battlefield, poem, law, and memory preserved in writing belongs within that comparatively brief interval. The Jurassic Ocean endured for more than 9,000 times that length of time. Entire civilizations would appear and disappear before a single fraction of its history had unfolded. What seems ancient within human memory becomes almost invisible against such a background. Agriculture, the patient partnership between people and cultivated land that allowed villages to become cities and cities to become civilizations, began roughly 10,000 years ago. Every harvest since then belongs to a story that remains remarkably recent beside the age of the Jurassic seas. Those oceans persisted for nearly 5,600 times as long as humanity has cultivated fields. Their tides advanced and retreated through spans of time that no tradition, monument, or language could hope to preserve. Even our own species occupies only the final moment of a much longer narrative. Modern human beings have existed for approximately 300,000 years, a remarkable achievement when measured against many other living creatures. Yet, the Jurassic period lasted more than 180 times longer. Countless generations of people have lived, loved, explored, and disappeared within an interval that would barely register against the duration of that ancient marine world. The disappearance of the non-avian dinosaurs marks one of the great boundaries in popular imagination. Approximately 66 million years separate that event from the present day, making it seem almost unimaginably distant. Yet the Jurassic Ocean had already ended, roughly 79 million years before that famous extinction occurred. By the time the asteroid transformed the closing chapter of the Cretaceous world, the seas that nurtured the great pliosaurs and the deep-diving ichthyosaurs had belonged to history for longer than the interval separating that impact from our own lives. An individual Ophthalmosaurus entered the water without awareness of these immense scales. It descended toward depths approaching 600 meters, that is nearly 1,969 feet, searching through darkness before rising again to breathe. It hunted, matured, reproduced, and eventually died within an ordinary lifetime measured by seasons rather than geological ages. Its descendants repeated similar journeys across millions of years. After the last member of its lineage vanished, another 90 million years passed before the earliest modern human beings appeared. The animal had already been absent for roughly 300 times the entire existence of our species before anyone could someday uncover its bones and wonder about the ocean it once inhabited. Nothing living within the Jurassic experienced those 56 million years as a vast expanse. Every surfacing for air unfolded within a single breath. Every pursuit ended in one instant of motion. Every sunrise reflected from the sea belonged only to that particular day. Immensity emerged without announcement, gathering from ordinary moments repeated beyond counting until they accumulated into a history that stretches far beyond the reach of direct imagination. Perhaps that is the only way such time can truly exist. It is not grasped all at once, nor compressed into a single image. It rests within stone, within fossils, and within the patient record of the earth itself, remaining far larger than memory, far older than language, and entirely complete whether any mind succeeds in imagining it or not. The name arrives only at the very end of the journey, We have called the Jurassic Ocean a nightmare, yet that word belongs entirely to the human imagination. It carries meanings shaped by memory, anticipation, and fear. It assumes a mind capable of looking beyond the present moment and imagining danger before it arrives. For almost the entirety of the Jurassic world, no such observer existed. The sea possessed immense power, but it had no witness capable of giving that power a fearful name. A nightmare requires a dreamer. It requires consciousness broad enough to recognize overwhelming scale, to understand what an immense bite means to a smaller body, to experience descending water not merely as increasing pressure, but as an unknown descending into darkness. It requires the ability to imagine endings before they happen. Those are distinctly human capacities. The creatures inhabiting the Jurassic Ocean lived according to different rules, shaped by instinct, sensation, and immediate survival, rather than reflection upon the wider world surrounding them. The great pliosaurs did not patrol ancient seas with cruelty. Their powerful jaws closed because powerful jaws secured food. Their immense bodies endured because they succeeded in the endless exchange between hunter and prey. Hunger guided them more faithfully than any emotion recognizable to us. Their lives unfolded one pursuit after another, each completed within the boundaries of a single present moment. The deep-diving ichthyosaurs likewise carried no awareness of mystery as they descended toward depths approaching 600 meters, that is nearly 1,969 feet. The darkness surrounding them required no interpretation. It was simply another part of the environment through which sensitive eyes and finely tuned senses had evolved to travel. Returning to the surface for air completed another ordinary cycle in lives, repeated across countless generations, without any understanding that future beings would someday marvel at the record they left behind. The ammonites, drifting through warm seas, possessed no knowledge that their beautifully coiled shells would survive long after their soft bodies vanished. Layer by layer, generation after generation, those shells settled across the seafloor until they became part of stone itself. Much later, they would emerge from cliffs and beaches into unfamiliar hands, admired by minds capable of contemplating histories extending far beyond individual lifetimes. The animals themselves never experienced that future. They remained entirely within their own passing moment. Viewed without human expectation, the Jurassic Ocean reveals something different from horror. Every ecological layer had become occupied. Every abundant source of nourishment supported another living form. Predators existed because prey flourished. Prey flourished because sunlight, ocean circulation, chemistry, and evolution had combined to sustain astonishing biological productivity. Nothing about this arrangement suggested malice. It represented life, responding completely to opportunity wherever opportunity appeared. The immense hunters, the drifting shoals, the shelled invertebrates, and the unseen microorganisms participated in the same continuous system. Each existence depended upon countless others through relationships established over millions of years. The ocean reached an expression of biological fullness that later ages would never reproduce, not because it sought perfection, but because planetary conditions briefly allowed such extraordinary complexity to endure. Only much later did another creature appear with the capacity to reconstruct those vanished worlds from fragments preserved within stone. Only then could immense predators become symbols instead of animals. Only then could profound depth become an image carrying emotional weight beyond physical reality. The ancient ocean itself remained unchanged by these interpretations. It neither welcomed nor resisted them. Perhaps that is the final distinction worth carrying forward. The nightmare never belonged to the Jurassic Sea. It belongs to us, the only species known to imagine worlds long vanished, to measure ourselves against scales that exceed ordinary comprehension, and to place names upon realities that never asked to be feared. The ocean simply existed, complete within its own age, while the dreamer arrived millions of years after the dream had already ended. Every wave arriving upon a shoreline appears new. It rises, curls, breaks, and withdraws, leaving the impression that the sea is forever replacing itself. In one sense, that impression is true. Water is always moving, always changing position, always passing from one state to another through a cycle that has endured across the history of the planet. Yet beneath that continual motion lies a deeper continuity that reaches back into worlds long vanished. Water leaves the ocean as vapor, gathers within clouds, falls across mountains and forests as rain, enters rivers, disappears into groundwater, freezes within ice, and eventually returns once more to the sea. These exchanges unfold across years, decades, and occasionally much longer intervals, repeating without interruption through changing climates and shifting continents. During the 176 million years separating the Jurassic from the present, the individual molecules composing the ancient seas have completed that journey countless times. They have belonged to glaciers, tropical storms, underground aquifers, snowfields, lakes, rivers, living cells, and oceans before beginning the cycle again. The individual molecules that surrounded the immense marine reptiles of the Jurassic are therefore no longer assembled in the same places. They have dispersed beyond recognition, exchanged endlessly through evaporation, condensation, and flowing water. Yet the substance itself has never departed from the planet. The hydrogen and oxygen compound that filled those ancient seas continues its circulation today, carrying dissolved minerals gathered from mountains, volcanic rocks, river valleys, and the seafloor itself. Every passage leaves subtle chemical traces that become part of the changing composition of the global ocean. In that sense, the water through which the greatest pliosaurs accelerated, the water entered by deep-diving ichthyosaurs, descending towards 600 meters, that is nearly 1,969 feet, and the water supporting immense drifting populations of ammonites has never truly disappeared. It has simply continued its uninterrupted journey through different forms, different landscapes, and different ages. Continuity survives even while every individual arrangement dissolves into another. What has vanished are the living communities that once transformed those waters into an ecosystem unlike any existing today. The immense predators, the abundant shelled cephalopods, the marine reptiles, and countless organisms without living counterparts completed their histories long ago. Their bodies returned to sediment, their shells became limestone, and their outlines remained only where unusual conditions preserved them within ancient deposits. The architecture of that remarkable ocean ended, leaving behind fragments that stone could protect, while living tissue disappeared. Water itself keeps no memory. It does not preserve intention, experience, or history within its movement. A current crossing the modern sea possesses no awareness that it passes above sediments formed during distant geological ages. Yet the consequences of those vanished oceans remain present throughout the planet. Carbon cycles through the atmosphere and the sea according to processes shaped across immense spans of time. Layers of marine limestone record biological productivity accumulated through ancient ecosystems. Evolutionary histories continue within every surviving lineage that inherited adaptations forged through countless generations of interaction with long-vanished environments. Every living creature inhabiting the modern ocean therefore exists downstream from worlds that no longer remain. Each lineage carries inherited solutions refined by ancestors responding to environments extending back beyond the Jurassic and through it. Selection never preserved memories. It preserved characteristics that improved survival, allowing descendants to inherit the accumulated outcomes of ancient encounters repeated across millions of years. Perhaps that is the deepest continuity of all. The Jurassic Ocean is absent as a living place, yet its influence continues without interruption. It persists within stone, within chemistry, within evolutionary inheritance, and within the endlessly circulating water that still embraces every shoreline. The ancient world survives not as remembrance, but as consequence, woven so completely into the present that the boundary between vanished ocean and living ocean becomes far gentler than it first appears. Far below the reach of daylight, there is a realm where brightness no longer shapes the passage of time. Water settles into immense layers, chilled to only a few degrees above freezing, drifting through the great basins of the planet along currents whose journeys may continue for centuries before returning toward the surface. Pressure increases without pause, surrounding every living thing with a force that has remained one of the defining conditions of the deep throughout Earth's history. This realm is not empty. It never has been. Its continuity stretches beyond individual species, beyond continents, beyond the rise and disappearance of entire ecosystems. Long before familiar coastlines existed, the deep ocean was already circulating through the heart of the planet's climate, carrying heat, dissolved minerals, and the products of life from one basin to another. It performs the same vast exchanges today, almost unchanged in purpose, even as everything inhabiting it continues to change. The Jurassic Ocean possessed this depth as well. Beneath its warm surface waters lay descending layers where extraordinary animals disappeared from view. An ichthyosaur, with eyes measuring 26 centimeters across, which is about 10 feet, that is nearly 3 meters, entered those depths in pursuit of prey, adapted to darkness. Above, immense pliosaurs crossed the upper waters with skulls approaching 2 meters, which is about 7 feet. Between those extremes traveled marine crocodilians, whose ancestors had once walked upon land before evolution reshaped them into creatures fully suited to open water. Their bodies belonged completely to the sea, though their distant origins remained written within their anatomy. None of those travelers remain. Their disappearance followed the ordinary rule that governs every lineage, regardless of how successful it may appear during its own age. Extinction removes entire ways of living, leaving neither descendants nor replacements that perfectly preserve what came before. Bones entered sediment, shells dissolved or hardened into stone. Organic remains passed through burial, pressure, heat, and mineral transformation until geology accepted them into the long record beneath our feet. Yet the ocean itself continued. Not the same collection of water molecules, not the same coastlines, and not the same living communities, but the enduring presence of a global sea linking continents beneath an ever-changing sky. It existed before the Jurassic began. It remained after the Jurassic ended. It will almost certainly continue long after every living species now inhabiting it has completed its own history and become part of future rock layers awaiting discovery by minds not yet imagined. The Jurassic endured for 56 million years. During that immense interval, it contributed more than remarkable fossils. It left extensive limestone formed from marine organisms that settled upon ancient seafloors. It helped build sedimentary layers that later became reservoirs of petroleum after prolonged burial and chemical transformation. It preserved shells that emerge from weathered cliffs and beaches, carrying intricate forms across immense expanses of time. It also shaped the evolutionary pathways of surviving lineages, influencing predators, prey, and ecological relationships whose descendants still inhabit the oceans of the present. Perhaps its greatest legacy is perspective. The familiar sea surrounding the modern world is not the only expression an ocean can achieve. Great white sharks, sperm whales, and orcas belong to a configuration assembled after repeated extinctions, continental rearrangements, and changing climates redirected the course of evolution. Another arrangement once flourished under different conditions, filling nearly every available opportunity with forms unlike those living today. The ocean continues without preference for either age. It carries no memory, offers no judgment, and preserves no favorite chapter within its immense history. It simply remains, receiving each generation of life, allowing it to flourish for a time, and eventually returning every living thing to the longer story written in stone beneath the sea.